This is a CNA podcast.
Previously on the serial swindler.
I scolded him and told him that you are just scamming me and there is no business, there is nothing, you are just a liar.
I think a person that would go to such lengths to play so many roles, to be a passionate lover, financial advisor, a Korean heir, a property guru, all these things, I think it would be a narcissistic sociopath.
Welcome to the second episode of The Serial Swindler. I'm Tiffany Ang. If you haven't caught up with our last episode, you might want to go back. In this episode, we'll try to piece together clues that will help us understand what goes on inside the mind of a serial scammer like Jerald Low. Who is he? What motivated him to go on a cruel spree where his victims lost almost $100,000? But before all that, we need to get back to the police, who were on his tail after receiving multiple reports. Except they too were caught in another web Jerald had spun.
The first report of telco scam was lodged in June 2018. Within the next 2 months, there came in additional reports. And that's where we know that this is not just a standalone. Jerald Low is actually committing a lot of series of offences, and then we need to get him fast.
That's ASP Ho Che Hin, the investigating officer for Jerald's case. But his plan to get Jerald fast took an unexpected turn.
In September 2020, we secured the conviction to have Jerald prosecuted in court, but Jerald comes in to lodge a police report. He said that he has been physically and verbally assaulted, threatened by his partner, and whatever criminal activities he has done, he has been coerced to do that. Did we really charge the wrong person?
The sole suspect of the police investigation now claimed he was the victim of a crime. This meant that ASP Ho and his team had to trawl through the evidence again. For the next 9 months, they re-interviewed Jerald and several witnesses.
We repiece the evidence again, rereading of the data, matching each and every of their versions. Then we line it up, and then we discover, that doesn't sound right. Jerald haven't even met his partner. How come he said that in 2018 he started to do this? So it's the timeline that gave him out.
Eventually, it became clear that Jerald was trying to fool the police.
More than 9 months of police work, re-interviewing has been put into place because of the false reports and the statements that he has been giving us. So due to his prejudice to the cause of justice, the police have charged him for the additional offence for giving false statements.
So we come back to the same question. Who is this guy? And why does he keep lying at every turn?
My name is Gino. I've been in practice for about 11 years.
Gino Hardil Singh is a criminal lawyer at Abbott's Chambers. He was assigned to provide pro bono legal services for Jerald.
This was one of a batch of several cases that we took from the Criminal Legal Aid Scheme, Law Society's pro bono services. I'm not particularly fussy about what is assigned, so I let them decide and I'll just take whatever they assign me.
The case was challenging from the beginning, says Gino.
This is probably by far one of the most complicated cases that we've dealt with. As the matter progressed, more complaints were made, further investigations were triggered. The offences he committed triggered investigations by 5 police land divisions. There are 7 land divisions in Singapore and he basically activated 5.
Eventually, Jerald had 51 charges against him. These included issuing bounce checks and deceiving several people to sign mobile contracts for him. Why did Jerald go to such lengths to gain, quite honestly, not a lot of money?
I found it bizarre. I asked him, why did you do this? So he says at the end of the day, I didn't think about the consequences, about getting caught. I just wanted to feel good about myself, and I wanted people to treat me well and with respect.
As his lawyer, Gino had to build a compelling defense for Jerald. So, he spent hours trying to understand his client better.
He doesn't strike me as particularly, what's the word to use now? Scheming. I understand that he and his mum were in debt and he would use the money to pay for his own bills. That's what he told us.
Despite knowing that his game was up and he had to face the consequences, Jerald would find ways to frustrate the legal process, like forging a medical certificate to avoid showing up in court.
The police had tried to verify it and found that it wasn't authentic. The impression is that he had a medical certificate forged so that he could actually delay his sentencing. But the reason why he did that was because his grandmother was gravely ill. And in fact, she passed away not soon after that. We're not condoning it, but we could understand where he was coming from. I think eventually he understood that he had run out of excuses already and it was time to face the music.
Okay, so is everyone comfortable? I'm catching up with my colleagues, Clarice Goh and Tang Hui Huan. They spent almost half a year following Jerald's case for a CNA documentary, catching Singapore's very own Tinder swindler. Clarice and Hui Huan recorded most of the interviews you are hearing in this podcast. Both of them had to comb through pages of documents and pictures which the police and the Attorney General Chambers shared. One set of pictures of Jerald's living room stood out for Clarice and Hui Huan, and it's right in front of me. What are we looking at here?
It was literally like piles and piles of things. Like you could not see the floor.
This is Clarice.
It was like take-out boxes, used tissue papers, just wires tangled up. You could see like the take-out boxes and then the tissue papers, you could see like the foot bits still on them. And then the police officer, she pointed out where Jerald slept, and it was like in the midst of all this. It was just difficult for me to sort of wrap my head around. Maybe this was something that he wanted to get away from. You know, every day when he comes back home, this is what he has to deal with. And so maybe this was his double life, when a time where he could just be someone other than himself.
Clarice told me that after speaking to some of Jerald's victims, his lawyer and the investigating officers, she felt that one piece of the puzzle was still missing. Jerald's very own version of the story. And surprisingly, after reaching out to him in prison, Jerald agreed to speak to her and Hui Huan. So what was it like on the day itself when you got into prison? Can you take me through it?
You have to surrender your phones, you have to surrender any communicative devices. Even the cards and these have to be checked through by prisons. So to make sure if we go in with 4 cards, we have to come up with 4 cards. So we did all that and we were ushered into this kind of pretty nice classroom actually.
So how would you describe your first impression of Jerald? Was he how you imagined him to be?
When he came in, he looked so small. And then he sort of like shuffled in with his like slippers and all that. He just looked like a 小弟弟 lah, you know, a small boy.
So when he turned up, I had my guard up already because I just felt that he knew he was coming in here to tell his side, and he probably has done some preparation.
My childhood was horrible. My parents are divorced. My mum brought me up with my grandmother.
That was Jerald speaking to Clarice and Hui Huan from Changi Prison. Almost immediately, Clarice said she noticed that Jerald speaks with a slight lisp, which you might have caught too. Another thing she noticed was that he never broke eye contact. Jerald started by talking about his childhood.
I go to school, friends have been laughing at me, no father. Every time Parents' Day, only mum or grandma will come. I have been looked down since young. I get bullied very easily in school. And even some things that happen, I couldn't get to voice out. Just keep everything bottled until it explode.
In secondary school, he claimed that things became worse.
In secondary school, because of my friend bully me, I spiked Panadol into my friend's drink, 13 tablets of Panadol. I was arrested by Gangling Police Division. I told the judge I'm willing to change. I was granted 32 months probation. That means I get to reunite with my family.
But Jerald didn't keep to his promise to stay crime-free. 9 years later, in 2018, he began plotting again. But this time too, he justified his compulsion to seek out more victims.
That time I'm facing hospital gaps of my grandmother. She's very, very sick. I'm the sole person taking care. My mom's salary is not enough and she is also not feeling well at a point of time. She was diagnosed with cancer. I've changed multiple jobs. I'm really stressed out at the point of time. I have no one to speak to. I don't have much friends. So I'm Google search how to be rich in very fast time. One of the websites has a particular techniques of teaching you how to scam, how to trick your friends. This only works with your close friends and relatives.
During the interview in prison, Clarice brought up Sarah's story. She's the love scam victim from our previous episode. Clarice asked, why did he propose marriage? And surprisingly, Jerald became defensive.
Oh, okay. I want to explain about this. I did not propose to her. She told me that she want to find a husband to marry in Singapore so that she can get a citizenship. She was only holding a PR at that point of time. And that guy I also never think so much. I said, okay, I help you. That is the intention. But after reading some of the articles online, and I find that it's actually a risky point and it is actually a criminal offense. So end of the day, I cancel it off.
Jerald stressed that he had always intended to pay his victims back their money. And now, while in prison, he said he has had time to think about his next step.
This journey, I learned a lot and I want to change. This time around, if I'm being released, never step back into prison anymore. I will stay crime-free.
I'm curious, Clarice and Hui Huan, did both of you believe his side of the story?
I felt that there was probably some truth, but there were a lot of plausible truths as well. I noticed that he made pretty good eye contact. Like, he was always looking at you. It almost felt conscious because it was like, here is my story and I want you to believe in it. I have interviewed other people who are kind of on the wrong side of the law, and generally they are mistrustful. They don't want to share too much, but here was someone who seemed to be very eager to share.
Clarice, did you feel the same way that Hui Huan did as well? Did you feel that he was very intentional in trying to convince you his story?
I felt that eye contact was sincerity in a way. And this was against, what I thought I would feel, because again, by that time, I already spoken to most of the victims and people who knew him, right? So I was very aware of the hurt that he caused. So I did not expect myself to feel that way when I spoke to him, that I felt almost sympathetic.
My conversation with Clarice and Hui Huan got me thinking, how can two people who sat in the same room with a convicted con artist leave with two different impressions of his story? Why did he agree to be interviewed in prison? Was he truly sorry to his victims? And the big nagging question, what goes on inside the mind of a serial swindler? We often hear warnings of how we can avoid being a scam victim. But while making this podcast, I kept asking myself, what is it like being on the other side? What goes on inside the minds of these scammers? And something one of his victims said stuck with me. Chris had called Jerald a narcissistic sociopath. Are narcissistic sociopaths so self-absorbed that they have no empathy for their victims? And can Jerald really be given that label? I thought the right person to ask, besides the con artist himself, is someone who has spent years studying criminal minds. So, I went in search of an expert, and that's how I found myself writing to Dr. Majid Kadir. But I'll be honest, I wasn't holding my breath that he'll say yes. He is, after all, the chief psychologist at the Home Affairs Ministry and has worked with the ministry for 31 years. Throughout my journalism career, I've experienced my fair share of cold shoulders and no thank you replies. So, as I hit send on the email, I braced myself for the bureaucratic red tape ahead. So it was a complete and happy surprise when Dr. Majid wrote back to say that he'll be happy to help. Within days, I secured the approval from the ministry, and that's how I found myself sitting across from this veteran criminal profiler asking a barrage of questions. Dr. Majid, what do you think are the main motivations of people who scam other people?
Often, for a lot of these swindlers, the big one is money, right? So it's greed, money, but the other ones would be fame, People know about you, people talk about you, oh, this rich person, very humble looking person, but very rich. So that's a bit of that reputation and kind of branding beyond just money. At another level, it would be the thrill of it. It's very shock, to be able to do this and get away and no one knows, People talk about me. And at the science level, there's this idea called duping delight.
Okay.
That's the delight of duping someone, tricking someone.
Oh.
So inside them, there's this delight that, oh my God, I got away with this. How dumb can you be? That kind of thing, you see. You remember that very famous movie, it's called Catch Me If You Can. So that title is interesting, right? His autobiography is called Catch Me If You Can. That's duping delight. That's like, I taunt you, try and catch me. I'm a shapeshifter.
But what are sort of common personality traits that we see in swindlers?
If you narrow it down to certain personality qualities, right, then this sensation seeking, this trying things out, seeing whether it works. A good conman needs to be conscientious, detailed focus, and also a very adaptable kind of person. Extremely resourceful. You're stuck with one situation, what's the plan for the next? So you don't only have a plan A, you have a B, C, D.
So almost like a highly intelligent being.
Yes, yeah.
They possibly could have a very high IQ as well.
That's right.
One of Jerald's victims called Jerald a narcissistic sociopath, and that he has no empathy for his victims.
I would think parts of it are accurate. In order to swindle someone, even if it's not to a person but to an organization, to sign up to different phone companies and then run away and sell the phones and all that, you may not be harming a person, but you're harming an organization. Some people feel guilty doing that. So to not feel guilty at all, not just harming a person, but harming an organization and sort of getting away with it and living a lie, means that you may not have that empathy. You may not feel for the broader society or individuals. Some psychopaths have this quality of superficial charm. So many of these swindlers have some of the characteristics of psychopathy.
I have to go back to a bit of 101 for myself. So what is the difference between psychopath and sociopath?
Psychopathy actually has stronger scientific background. A sociopath is a term that used a little bit more casually, not as much research on it. A lot of people use the term sociopath. So I wouldn't be so keen to use the terms. I would say there's a lot more evidence for psychopathy. But having said that, not all psychopaths are also tricksters.
Yeah.
Some of them are.
You may have that tendency, but it doesn't mean you act out on these tendencies, right?
That's right, yeah. But let me tell you what the characteristics of psychopaths are. They are glib liars. They have no guilt telling multiple lies. They have charm. A lot of them are charming. and superficially charming. So by that, what you mean is you get taken in. You're so taken in by their approach. They may not necessarily be good-looking people, but they have this thing with people. They can connect. They know which buttons to press and somehow make you feel comfortable, relaxed, right? And they do not have empathy. Even those who are working with scam centers across the world. If you look at the videos of them in action, many of them are laughing.
So is childhood trauma or adverse events in the family often associated with higher risk of crimes in serial scammers?
Simple answer is actually there is evidence scientifically that shows that certain very difficult childhood experiences can result in trauma in a person's life and has been correlated with criminal behavior, deviant behaviors. But not everybody who has had a difficult childhood actually turns out that way. Many don't. And the many who don't have difficult childhoods do turn out to have criminality later. So I wouldn't put too much of a focus on it, but I wouldn't ignore it either, and say it doesn't play a factor. I would say we'll have to be a little bit careful about those who come out too quickly to say, all this happened to me and I'm like this because of my childhood. Because there's so many people who have had difficult childhoods who actually come out stronger. A difficult childhood can actually make you bitter or better, right? So it doesn't always make you bitter and a criminal.
So is there a likelihood of serial scammers re-offending after coming out of prison?
I think so. For a couple of reasons. In the past, if you had to con someone, you would have to gather people to your cart and you have to sell that snake oil and convince people. But today, because our communities are a little bit more segregated, and so it's easy to meet someone, it's easy to use cyber means to convince someone, it's easy to create an identity completely online that's completely false. And also because we are so globally connected. So you've done it in Singapore, if you can, go elsewhere and do it, you might. If you can link up with transnational networks and collaborate with other scammers, you can get it done as well. And when they go to jail, sometimes the jail sentence seems quite light because you take certain amount of money and then the sentence is tied to amount of money and things like that. So they go in and they learn new skills. Sometimes they share stories with other criminals. They come out, they become a little bit more advanced in the way they do it.
I have lost everything.
In February 2022, a month before he was due to appear in court, Jerald's grandmother died from pneumonia. In March, his mother watched as the judge sentenced her son to 5 years and 7 months in jail.
I think this hurts my mom a lot because my mom was at a hearing. She did not expect that I'd done so many wrong things. She visited me in March, April, May. June was the last visit. So 4 months straight. In 8th of July, I was made aware by the prison side that my mom passed on. When the OC broke to me this news that my mom will never come and visit me anymore, she has passed on, I was very, very upset. And a lot of things just blushed through my mind. I should be the one that should be suffering, not her. I should be the one getting critically ill. And coming to prison is not worth it.
Working on this story, I've come to realize that humans tend to fall for the things we most desperately desire. It's almost a weakness we cannot help. It could be a luxury watch that was selling for an unbelievably cheap price, or the promise of a better job or a business opportunity. It could be as simple as a nice compliment someone gave you after a difficult day. And that's the power swindlers have over their victims. The power of knowing that they've identified these desires and vulnerabilities. and they can now exert control. We may never know who the real Jerald is. Was he a victim of a traumatic childhood or a narcissistic sociopath, as one of his victims described him as? Whatever it was, what's clear is that his deception left a trail of ruined lives, and theirs is a silent suffering that will continue. This podcast special is a companion product of the CNA documentary called Catching Singapore's Very Own Tinder Swindler. You can catch it online at channelnewsasia.com/watch. This episode of The Serial Swindler is written and produced by me, Tiffany Ang. Research is done by Jacqueline Chan, social media by Joanne Chan. Sound design is done by Sai Ye Win, and Crispina Robert is the editor. If you like this series, share it. It's available on the CNA and Me Listen apps and on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.